anybody out there that doesn't know me, my name is Barry Cranford. I'm the founder of the Fractional consultant community and a bunch of other tech user groups. So we're running this event very much to try and help a fractional that I caught up with earlier this week, who was asking a few questions, was just looking for how to get started and how to set themselves up to be successful in this space. So I said, well, why don't we just try and get a few people together and ask a bunch of questions, because clearly there's going to be a lot of people that have a similar kind of, a similar set of things to find out. So that's what this is about. Thank you everyone for being here. So I'm going to dive in with some questions for Luke, and I don't know if Joe, I think a couple of you just joined. It is being recorded, so obviously only say what you're comfortable to be going out on YouTube and sharing with the other members afterwards. So first things first then, let's say you have just decided that you want to quit your permanent job and become a fractional, or maybe you've been made redundant and you're now looking at this new fractional term that's all over LinkedIn. Matthew, I'm going to direct this at you. What would you say is some of the first steps that you should be taking there?
I think if you can, and if you are employed, I think actually it's quite good to actually start putting the foundations down before you actually kind of resign or actually get made redundant or whatever. I think certainly for me, it probably took about 2-3 years for me to kind of warm up in terms of actually kind of understanding the kind of the layout, understand kind of what I need to do in terms of kind of setting up a business, in terms of accounting, all of those things. So if you have a runway, definitely try and use it. And the other advice I've given to others in this space previously is, if what you can do sometimes is actually convert your existing full-time employment into your first paying kind of fractional customer, because often there's a transition in going from kind of doing what you're doing now to someone coming on board, handover, all those kind of things. And actually sometimes the company actually quite likes that idea. And actually, if they can keep having access to you over a longer period, that's quite a nice way of starting out. The other advice I give is kind of furious networking. So I think one of the things that I did when I first started out on this journey, I was lucky enough in some cases to be made redundant, which basically gave me the kick up the arse to kind of move forward. So actually I used the time available to really kind of go out and network with people while also doing my first interim gig. And actually the more seeds you sow, I think, the more the better it is. And actually, some of those things are coming to fruition like 8.5 years later. So everyone says networking is a good thing to do, but I firmly believe that.
Furious networking. I love that. And it's so true. Heard this over and over and over again. I've done a bunch of sessions recently with various people on how to network, how to do it, how to be more successful here. Yeah, I'm hearing it from every angle. So couldn't agree more. I think within this session, I'm going to try and focus on some of the more practical things, like setting up a company, how that might look, legals, term sheets, those kind of things, to set people up for people entering this for the first time. So where I'd like to start, the importance of an accountant, why you need an accountant, how to screen an accountant. Matthew, I'm going to ask you firstly on this, but if anyone else has any contrasting or complementary opinions afterwards, I'd love to hear from them as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to have a good friend of mine that recommended an accounting company to me, particularly one that focuses on contractors, because back then it was kind of less of a thing, particularly when you're trying to navigate things like IR35, etc. So I kind of went with that. I went with that kind of conversation. I really enjoyed the people, and I think you need to find an accountant that is quite sensible in terms of things like tax, but also not to the letter, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that you should look for loopholes, but I'm just saying that certain accounts
not over cautious.
Yeah, exactly that, right? So. And they advised me on a lot of things, right? So they advised me on kind of setting up my limited company. through to kind of securing kind of the name of my company, as well as kind of advising on kind of like quarterly tax returns and things. One of the things that I found quite difficult, because I really like to kind of have I really like to have an understanding of how much money I'm making and actually how much money I need to put aside. This accountant wasn't incredibly good at basically telling me how much I should be saving for quarterly tax returns, corporation tax, what the split was. So I had to learn that probably over 2 years in terms of actually myself and actually doing lots of research. So I guess that's kind of my, that was kind of my first foray into it.
Brilliant. Khalil, any experience to add to that around accountants, how you found your accountant, and anything you'd agree with there, disagree with, or just add to what Matt said?
I mean, I'm fairly new to the whole fractional thing, but I feel like I've gotten a bit of a head start because of kind of engaging with several people who have already done it, including Matthew, actually. Basically, for me, it was quite easy because now there's a lot of accountants that are specialized in contractors, etc. So it's actually more of a finding the ones that you're more comfortable with, rather than you not being able to actually find anyone. And so I went with ones that were recommended to me by a couple of people that I spoke to that were very happy with them. Went and saw their reviews online, and they had stellar reviews. And so far, I'm quite happy with kind of how proactive they are as well. I think the key, though, is to find someone who understands your specific needs, because each contractor is different. Each person is working with a different amount of money and different aims as well in terms of savings or investments, etc. So to me, the most important part is actually finding one that really understands what drives you and what your needs are and what you're actually planning for the future.
Yeah, thanks, Khalil. Yeah, I've definitely found like just to come into what you were saying there, Matt, about the fact that they can offer you a lot more than you first think. When you first get an accountant and you think it's just about the money and handling those kind of things, but it is much more of a business advisor in those early days, how to set things up, what to set up, and a lot of the advice. Obviously, they work with so many other people that are just like you, especially if you've got the contracting specialists. So they know the challenges you're going to face, months, years before you face them yourself. But also, I've not had this from you guys, but we've switched accountants a few times. We've certainly noticed they're not all the same. They're not all equal. There is a big variety. So going through recommendations and seeking referrals, like pretty ruthlessly, I think is really, really well advised. So yeah, anyone else, any thoughts, questions about accountants then, experiences to share? Yeah, Alex.
So I've been a contractor for many years, and I've used 2 different accountants over that time, which I'm reasonably happy with for contract work. I was wondering whether anybody thinks the accountant needs to be familiar with fractional type contracting, or whether probably any experience of contracting is probably adequate. Does anybody have any opinion on that? Because I'm hearing just kind of like accountants familiar with contracting. Anybody want to? Andy's got his hand up.
So the firm that I use is recommended to me by my wife, who is a contractor for 15 years. But it was also recommended to me by a friend who has a small business that turns over probably less than £1 million a year. They seem to be able to flex to a company that has 2 employees, kind of a lifetime long-serving contractor who's got 1 client that might be an engagement that lasts 2 or 3 years at a time or longer, or fractional, where it's like I've got 5 people that pay me money and it's dribs and drabs, and it's some of it's regular and some of it's not. So I think there are firms that can deal with all of those. One of the things I quite liked is the firms that give you access to the free agent software, so you can kind of do the stuff yourself. So that the people I know who run this business actually run their business using free agent software. And a lot of the good contracting accountants will just give you a license to that software for free if you do their monthly.
Yeah, I mean, I use web-based thing provided by the accountants, so it's not I'm not installing Free Agent, but I'm using their software, and that seems to work out quite well for me. Yeah, thanks very much.
The other software that's quite good is obviously Xero. And what I've tried to do, because I went down that route of basically installing my own accounting software early on, and basically learned the hard way that that is quite inefficient in terms of time. So what I've tried to do now is do Xero in terms of kind of accounting that reconciles with my bank, that my accountant can see and basically look at. But I also use Dex for invoicing, both sales invoices and also cost invoices. So effectively they upload directly into Xero, and then effectively you can reconcile. And then I've just added Wise to allow me to basically pay kind of invoices, which actually it's just been a breath of fresh air, because it's probably saved me about 10 hours a month just in using those services. And again, some of those are free and some of those are kind of paid for add-ons.
Thanks very much.
Just a quick question on that. So I'm very new to this space as well, and I'm kind of looking to get set up. I see that like kind of the Starlings and the Monzos have some of that kind of stuff built in. So some of the like sending payment links and invoicing and that kind of stuff. But I don't know if anybody's got any experience as to whether like the quality of those kind of tools can replace something like Xero. Like if you could just go with a neobanks like invoicing and reporting setup, or if you're always going to need something like Xero.
So I have my company bank account with Starling as well. And yeah, they do provide some of these kind of very basic services, but I've actually found that the similar services, especially invoicing within Free Agent, to be far superior. So I'm just using Free Agent for kind of invoicing and all of that, and just reconcile in Starling. It's been fairly simple, honestly. And I made the mistake initially as well of kind of trying to do my own thing with and installing software, etc. And I actually probably chose the worst choice, which was QuickBooks to start with. And I was just completely overwhelmed and confused. And so Free Agent was a real breath of fresh air.
May I make a comment on that as well?
Definitely.
So I don't actually do fractional, although I'm learning more about it. But I've sort of tinkered, I suppose, for a number of years with a company I kept dormant for a while, and I recently opened up for some side hustle work just to sort of to dip my toes in to see what it was like. And I got very nervous about the accounting side, because it's, you know, if there's one institution you do not want to get on the wrong side of, it's the HMRC. One thing that I really liked about the Free Agent package, I suppose, was the documentation. For someone who is, you know, has no experience in accounting, their documentation was absolutely fantastic, and it was often kept up to date within days of any new legislation or something like that was coming out of a budget or something like that. And that gave me a lot of confidence, and it really helped me understand from my perspective the potential risks and the various things that you had to sort of take account of. And I think people tend to underestimate how important documentation around something this complicated can be. I don't know if anyone would agree with that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to be honest, it's the reason why I like having the accountant, because no matter what I do, at the end of the year, they'll go through all of my statements and accounts. Or now it's on Xero, it's just a lot easier. So effectively, they are the people that give me the confidence that actually they're rubber stamping it. Therefore, I'm happy. Although obviously the responsibility is yours, it does give a level of comfort.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks everyone. Okay, so I'm going to move on quickly, kind of, from accounting to that big ugly one of IR35. Now, obviously, any advice on this, any thoughts on this needs to go through legal and that kind of thing. So this isn't a kind of, here's an IR35 guide or anything like that. Is anyone happy to share experiences, thoughts, what they've done working inside, outside IR35 from their perspective, from their opinion in that kind of way?
So I've also been lucky on that in that I kind of engaged with a lot of people that were doing the fractional CTO thing before I started. So I hit the ground running, and one of them very generously kind of shared the contract that they use for their agreements, and it's kind of designed to comply with IR35. And there are a few key things that I find are important, such as substitution clauses, where the contract says that you can replace yourself with another kind of equally skilled individual, and the customer has the client of refusal. And you know, having multiple customers at the same time always helps, obviously, because you can prove that obviously I'm not full-time and I'm not, you know, performing an employment with them. Where it gets murkier, I'm finding, is when you actually have an account kind of on your client systems. So for example, in my current engagement, I also have an email on their G Suite, because I need to access a lot of their systems, etc. And sometimes that's a gray area for HMRC, where they view you as kind of, they could start viewing you as a firm. So there's a lot of confusing stuff around it. And I think for me, I think probably the most important is picking out the right level of insurance that also covers that, because it feels like even HMRC doesn't really understand the legislation or how they want to tackle it.
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd add is that you need a tight scope, which talks to the contract that you kind of mentioned, right? So a tight scope, it should be time limited, so not unlimited in terms of just rolling. And the other thing you need to be careful of is when you've got line management responsibility, you can be seen as a kind of a more of a full-time employee, or a kind of a sort of a more permanent fixture. However, having said that, it comes back to the time limited thing as well. So effectively, if you're recruiting your full-time replacement as well, that also looks really positive too.
I went back to my previous employer as a fractional, and that can ring alarm bells that you're just going straight back into where you were. So the way that I did that is, I got my contracts checked for IR35. The kind of company I used does that for free if you take out their insurance. So I pass all my contracts through them, and then whilst the agreements tend to be boilerplate, the statements of work, I always limit to 3 months, even if every 3 months we sign up, and we keep that rolling. So it's fixed in terms of duration, but a lot of the duties are quite generic, like I provide advice and things like that. The other things I've kind of done to maybe distance myself from the company is I tend to turn down stand-ups. So if they go, oh, we want your help on this project, I'm like, absolutely brilliant, yeah, I'd love to help on that project. Don't invite me to the stand-up. Why? Because SDC, which is what HMRC, kind of look at, the supervision, direction and control, is you're kind of directing my day if I've got to be in front of a screen at a certain time. So I'm not coming to your stand-ups, I'm sorry. You can get me on Slack 10 minutes later to tell me what you want me to do that day, but I'm not going to be in stand-ups, nor do I accept company-wide meetings. Like, even though this is the company that I was with for 5 years, I was one of the first employees, I was on the leadership team, I was really part of this company, and now I'm back as an advisor. I don't really know what's going on in my old company, even though I'm super friendly with the founders and everything, because I'm not on the all hands, because that's for the company and I'm a supplier. So those are the two kind of meetings that I tend to always turn down.
Does that apply for things like management meetings though? Because if you have like a C-level position, even if it's fractional, it makes sense to attend those. I'm still trying to figure out what the right balance is as well. So I'm not doing stand-ups, but management
I attend the management ones where there's something strategic behind it. Like it's even if it's a retro, even if it's a demo, there's something strategic about those where my opinion is needed. But a stand-up is just so I can tell you how I'm going to do my day, which sounds too much like control to me. So it's just stand-ups that I don't say yes to.
It's different if you're the one managing the stand-up. If you're the CTO providing stand-ups for everybody else, that's different, because you're not being managed.
That sounds fair, because you're being employed to exert the control. Yes. You're not subject to it. I would just make sure that the meeting invitation came from you in that case. Then
that's a good idea. Yeah. I wanted to add something, which is if you're new to this, this is one area that you need to be prepared in advance. It's probably not adequate to get the work, and then think about the IR35 status afterwards, because otherwise if there's a recruitment agent involved, they will probably say the client wants everything to go through an umbrella company, and therefore the decision is taken outside of your hands. But if you are prepared in advance and say, these are the services I provide, this is the contract that you can sign, this is the purchase order you can complete in order to you get me to do these services, then you have a much better chance of actually genuinely having an outside IR35 contract. So be prepared.
Good, that's good advice. Andy, can I ask you a question? Did you have a break between going from permanent to fractional? Because I think in some cases they say sort of leave it a month, but I'm interested.
I went back the next day.
Okay.
But then I went back the next day, but they were my second client that I signed that day. So once I start working there, on the next Monday, I started to work with 2 clients, and I signed contracts for them second. Not that will make any difference, but because of that, it looks like I'm not going straight back. But I was just like,
yeah, great.
Barry, I don't think you need to raise your hand.
Well, do you know, I just wanted to signal something. I'm going to kind of pull the IR35 thing down, because literally we could probably talk for the rest of the day about it, but I think that gives a bit of an introduction and kind of a bit of an overview. It's one of those things that I get advice on and stuff, but phenomenal overview there, guys. So
just before we move on, Andy, are you able to share who the insurance company is? Because I'm currently, I need to put some insurance in place.
We're allowed to say on this call. Yeah.
Oh, of course, absolutely, yeah.
So QDOS, that's the letter Q, DOS. And I used them because my wife used them for 15 years, and she said they were very good, and they did all her IR35 contracts for investment banks and hedge funds for like years and years and years and years. I was like, well, my wife's way better at this than I am. If it's good enough for her, good enough for me. I've been happy with them. They provide my liability insurance and all my other insurance, and for free. I send them every contract, and they go, take this out, take that out, and it's the standard stuff. It's the right substitution and stuff like that they'll do. Yeah.
Barry, may I ask one singular and pointed question about IR35? Very, very quick.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got like 5 minutes left on the call, but yeah,
oh, right,
absolutely.
Sorry. It's about the HMRC IR35 checker, because from what I gather, if you fill it out accurately, they will stand by that decision. Does anyone have any experience with that? Would they rate it? Is it just is it a gap filler, or would you largely I assume you would rely on external advice, but has anyone actually used it?
I used it, and it just said, yeah, you're fine. You've got multiple clients, blah, blah, blah. So it's a checkbox exercise, but it's not a bad 2 minutes of your life to just say, well, I went through your guidance and it said I was fine. So I don't think there's any harm in it. It's free and it takes 2 minutes, yeah.
I just wonder if anyone finds it a particular advantage, because HMRCs say they'll stand by the decision of the checker as long as it's as long as you fill it out honestly.
We've not successfully prosecuted hardly anyone in IR35. Like, all the test cases fail eventually. So
that's great. Thanks.
To do. Yeah. This call is going.
I've got I'm just going to put a document there. If anyone wants to put their LinkedIn's on, I'd always recommend this. Every call that we do, just keep boosting your network. As Matthew said, furious networking. Put your LinkedIn's there, share it, and then if you've got any questions like the IR35 checker, the QDOS insurance, all that kind of thing, accountants, it just means that you've got a wider network of people that you can ask things to. So feel free to put your LinkedIn there, and we'll connect afterwards. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to know was the team. So we talked about accountants, talked about the importance of getting a good accountant. We've touched there on insurance, but is there anyone else that you should have in your team of support? So like legal advice, is there any specific lawyers you should go for? Again, insurance or insurance brokers or anyone like that. Is there anyone else that you'd recommend adding to your support team if you're just getting started?
Insurance brokers is a great one, because there's a lot of key clauses that you can't get going direct. For example, if you go to Hiscox and get professional indemnity, there are certain kind of clauses that brokers will help you get, and also that they can get you preferred terms as well. So, for example, for Hiscox, I go through a company called Prism, and basically it's been a positive experience all the way from the start. And again, I got introduced to that from a friend, from the same friend that introduced me to the accountant.
Could you put the link in the chat of who that broker was, please?
Yeah, of course.
Anyone else specific? Do you need a sort of a general legal advice line, or a lawyers, a specific company that you work with there? What would you recommend there?
I had a very good experience with the Federation of Small Business, which I think individual membership is about 180 quid a year, and there's a ton of things that come with it. I think there's even a low-level type of insurance that comes with it, as just by virtue of being a member. There's a wealth of free documentation and knowledge and advice that comes with it. Thankfully, I've never had to sort of rely on they have a legal advice line as well. I've never had to rely on it yet, thankfully. But starting out, even just as dipping my toes in, it sort of gave me an extra degree of confidence on that. If I'm talking from a starting out perspective for a relatively small amount of money, it was nice to have that. It was nice to have them at your back.
Thanks, Ricardo. And anyone else has used, any other professionals that you've kind of had that you've turned to or wish you had?
I guess the one we haven't spoken about is banking. And I've moved banks quite a lot because I've moved from Lloyds to Barclays and then back to Lloyds because I realised that Lloyds are actually pretty good. Barclays are terrible. I think everyone has different kind of views, but I think, and I certainly, I get kind of Starling and like the various different neobanks out there, but I'm quite traditional when it comes to banking, and I like to pop in and kind of sort of talk to a branch manager. But yeah, I think banking is quite important.
And we caught up recently with NatWest, and whilst we don't bank with them, they seem like a really good bunch. They seem really aligned, and yeah, there was a guy from the accelerator, and they're really doing a lot in the community to try and reach out with other people. I don't know if anyone else had any positive or negative experiences with banks.
NatWest's Metal account is free as a business bank, so I have all my stuff with Monzo, like my personal stuff, but because you can't mix them, I looked around what's the best free business account that literally will just take money in and dividends out. I don't need anything else, but I want to get to it like on my phone and stuff, and their Metal account's free, and yeah, really good.
I've had a very positive experience with NatWest, and their integration between the business and the personal accounts is pretty seamless, actually, and you can view them alongside each other. But the other nice thing is I think NatWest actually owns Free Agent, so if you have a business account with them, you get Free Agent for free anyway, and it integrates seamlessly. There's no excuse for it not working, let's put it that way. I think that their model for how you pay for it is incredibly flexible. So, starting out when you didn't have much money, when you didn't have any business coming in, you didn't have to worry too much about the cost piling up.
Perfect. Okay, I've got about another 5 minutes to sing one, so I've got about another 5 minutes, and I'm going to shoot off. As I say, I'm happy to transfer the hosting and for this to go on as long as everyone's happy to be involved. So finding like a terms sheet.
Sorry, Barry, I was just going to say it's quite funny because the CTO of Free Agent, or the co-founder, Ollie Heedy, he's now gone fractional after obviously selling the business.
Does he use Free Agent?
I think he does. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he does.
Okay, So yeah, the terms sheet. So you're just about to get involved with a new client. Obviously, we need to get this scope of work and all of that kind of thing. Where do you go? Where do you turn? What sort of framework templates or anything do you use? Would you recommend?
So I got asked. I've met with quite a lot of people, some people on the call, and I'm about to meet some other people on the call as well. One of the things I get asked a lot is this, and actually one of the things I'm going to do shortly is actually kind of publish all the things I use, so engagement letters, contracts, and obviously with a health check warnings, so effectively use them, put them through your own solicitors or the business that you're going to be working for. But I think these are things that have gone through, in some cases, countless lawyers. So actually, I'm more than happy to kind of share what I've got, and I'll probably put it into the thing the doc that you shared, Barry. But certainly, you shouldn't be starting from scratch. I think you should be looking to lean on someone or get some advice from someone. And if it is a solicitor, that's fine too. But I think there's probably more than enough kind of people in our position that we should be kind of sharing the knowledge rather than kind of trying to hold it back.
I've just followed Matthew, so hopefully he's going to post it on LinkedIn as well.
That's very, very generous offer, Matt. I think it's going to help a lot of people. That obviously, as you say, it took you 2 or 3 years to learn a bunch of this stuff. I know exactly what you mean by that, and yeah, that you've kind of able to speed up the journey for a lot of people there. I think is amazing. Well, guys, that's it.
So I don't have any agenda or anything like this, and I don't work for RecWorks. What haven't we talked about? We've talked about accountants. We haven't talked about finding work. What's been missed out? Please jump
there's one question I have that I guess it's around about how you start marketing yourself.
Yeah,
like I'd be really interested to know if people have gone as broad as possible, as generic as possible, like, oh, I'm a CTO and I can help small businesses and huge enterprises, and I can help you with compliance, and I can help you with agile development, and just like I'm a jack of all trades, or whether people have gone, these are the things that I specialize in, and have actually deliberately gone narrow.
I could talk all day on this subject, so please, somebody else stop me.
I mean, because I was starting fresh, kind of newly, and the market is a lot more competitive, I think, now than it may have been a few years ago with Fractional. I've tried to find a niche for myself, and because I've done a lot of work with startups and scale-ups, that's what I've targeted, and that's what all kind of my promotional material says. But it's kind of, I stealthily also put in that, I can do a lot of different things and help a lot of different organizations. So my main sales deck type thing very much focuses on what I can do for startups and scale-ups, but it also has a section for, one pager for investors, to help with due diligence, etc., and a list of kind of things that I'm able to do. And that reflects whether it's a startup or not, I think. But probably putting yourself in an easy to digest box is useful for marketing.
I roughly agree. I mean, I see a lot of advice saying specialize, do one thing really, really well. And the companies that need something slightly else can ask you. There's no problem with that. But the marketing, I think, has to be do one thing really well. Even if you offer the services to a number of different options. Barry's messaging me and distracting me at the same time. Go to your other meeting, Barry. My problem with this is that I specialized as a big data consultant about 10 years ago and thought that was a specialization, whereas nowadays the whole of data engineering, data science, machine learning has to incorporate a certain amount of that scalability. So it's no longer a specialization. It's kind of like everybody has to do it if you're doing that sort of thing. So I am hunting for my niche that works well in marketing. So do we have anybody else wanting to come?
I think the other powerful thing, right, is knowing your journey. So actually, it's kind of the destination is relatively important, but I think the journey on how you got there, I think, is also important. So actually, kind of explaining why you've become fractional, for want of a better word. So I guess the reason why I wanted to become fractional was because I was finding more and more my time within business was getting shorter and shorter, because I focus on basically the meaty problem, and then once the meaty problem's gone away, then effectively I get bored when I go into sort of business as usual. So actually that now what I do is basically work with a number of funds that I do due diligence for, which either turn into three things. So either turns into an interim fractional CTO role, it turns into a mentoring role, or an advisory role. So that's my journey, and I absolutely love it. Work comes from different directions, but I think what I'm known for is kind of going in, steadying the ship, sorting a problem out, and then handing it over to someone that I probably recruit.
That's very interesting, and I have a similar sort of story in that I although I was a coder many years ago, I nowadays do architecture, so I'm heavily involved in the design phase. But after that, when it's being implemented, people just need me here and there, which suits the fractional lifestyle quite well. It means that I'm not totally cut off from the actual implementation of the project, but they're not paying me full-time Monday to Friday every single day of the week, and that makes sense for fractional. I hope I can persuade them of that. But
yeah, I think a lot of kind of supervisory roles where kind of you're acting as a sense check and kind of strategic checkpoint for things really work for fractional. So I'm talking to a company in the US now about potentially doing that for their Cloud Center of Excellence. For example, they've just set that up, and I've run those for several companies before when I was in a big consultancy. And so what I'm suggesting to them is 1 day or 2 days a week when it's really busy to just kind of go, yep, no, this is, and classify workloads and say, do we rewrite this? Do we kind of just use more platform as a service, etc. So I think these types of, I guess it is kind of a high level architecture role really at the core of it, are really good for fractional engagement.
I have another question if nobody else wants to comment on that.
I'm just going to comment from my side. I mean, I've been fractional, about 18, 19 years probably. So as long as I've been consulting. So I've got to answer that kind of first question from my perspective, I think if I was starting again now, I'd have probably gone for much more of a specialism. So I have a technical background, I have a sales background, I have an operational background. So I think, and part of the reason for that is the time and effort that's required when you're much more of a kind of generalist, particularly when you're trying to talk about who you are, what you are. And I think reverse of it these days is much more about the ease of which people find you. That's a hell of a lot more difficult if your CV's got, I've sold $1 billion worth of kit. I've managed, I don't know, 20 companies at a CTO level, and I had 900 staff when I ran that operation, like call center operation. Their engines just won't find you. And the reverse of it is when your data's going in, their engines just can't compute that either. So my thing, like I say, if I was starting again, I'd be going back and just being very specific about one thing and then kind of branching out from that rather than go with much more of a generalistic thing. Because I think my again, my sense of it is the way the market's going is as fractionals become more interesting to people, there will be kind of more outbound from those organizations looking for people in those fractional roles. And it's kind of, how do they find you? Other than the word title fractional on your CV, you know, they're doing basically simplistic keyword searches. And if you haven't got the skills match, they just kind of bypass where you are and whatever you're trying to do from a marketing perspective. So that would have been my only comment, if that helps.
Thanks very much, Paul. I think that's actually a very important point, and I was going to ask everybody else, do you have any suggestions for how people can find you? Does anybody else have anything? I mean, most of what I do is just LinkedIn, but it doesn't necessarily work for everything.
I think, as Matt mentioned, the kind of holy grail is when you get in with a fund, and that opens up so many opportunities. I have a friend who's been doing fractional work for probably 10 years and saw the difference when a very large PE firm that he knew from his previous life said, well, can you come and give your expert opinion on X? 2-week gig, goes in, does the thing, and they're like, right, okay, we're going to keep you around on our books, and every time we just need your brain for a few days, you know, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And I understand it's reasonably lucrative, as well as being, if not like all of your work, it's regular enough to be a really good kind of string to your bow. I don't know, Matt, if you've got kind of views on that. I'd love to hear how much of your time, like the fund generated work, is in your kind of day and things like that.
So I'd say that most of so the catalyst for me going outbound rather than things being inbound was basically when I did an audit for a company, which actually turned out to be like a sell side due diligence, which I didn't know at the time. So 2 funds saw that report on the sell side, and then 2 funds saw it on the buy side as well. So, and it turns out that two of those funds are the ones that give me the most business these days. And it typically starts from the due diligence piece, and then doing sort of dropping in as a fractional or doing some advisory stuff. But more often than not, the fund will reach out to me direct now, or some of the portfolio companies will, to actually say, actually, we've got a CTO that we'd like you to mentor, or actually would like some advice in terms of actually do a brief due diligence, but then come in and help us kind of fix those things. So like having it's really difficult to get into them, but once you, because effectively it's kind of, they need to see a need before they use you. But now that I've been introduced to a few, that I would say is probably, I'll say about 80% of where my work comes from.
I wanted to agree in a certain way, but which is that if you can get at least one client that gives you repeated work, then that makes things so much calmer and more relaxed ongoing, because you're not sitting there with no client at all. You at least have a client that's going to be coming up and with work now and again. So that's particularly one reason for, if say you're leaving a permanent employment and you get the odd bit of work from them, that seems to be a good thing to me, because you have that safety net ongoing, and don't have to worry too much about being totally out of work. But
I think that's actually the thing that allows me to sleep at night since I went fractional is, from the first day I went fractional, I was full 3 days a week. So I had 2 clients, one taking me 2 days a week, one taking me 1 day a week, and mentally saying, actually, that's enough to live on. You've just got to try and fill 2 days if you want it, but repeatedly tell myself, if you want it. And some weeks I decide not to, or things like that, is the thing that kind of saved me from that horrible, I've got no work. I've got no work, have I got enough savings? And that makes you slightly more desperate, and it makes you slightly more kind of reachy and things like that. It's a lovely position to be in, and I have no advice to give on how, because it just fell into my lap. Yeah, but I don't underestimate how wonderful it is just to have enough work and then fill on top of it. It makes it so much easier.
It's also a real shift in perspective. I found, like, for me, I kind of instinctively was going, same as you. I have 3 days a week currently, pretty much, and I'm looking at filling another 1 or 2 potentially, kind of, maybe not every week, but getting to the point where you're like understanding at an instinctive level that actually this is bringing in enough to kind of, you know, it's pretty much the same as when I was working full time, and it's a real mindset shift. And once you kind of get to that shift, there's just like a real sense of relaxation, I guess. You know, I'm a lot less stressed than I was before, even though I have to do my own business development and my own marketing, etc. But I'm even more motivated to do it because it's for me.
That leads on to I think my last question, if nobody else has any comments on this. So one of the things that I've seen in the fractional consultant community is that some clients see us as just a way of reducing costs, and because they therefore think that a experienced person at 1 day a week is cheaper than that experienced person full time. But that may also lead us to clients that are not willing to pay a sensible amount. So how do you control price? Is it something that concerns you? Does it really have any comments on this? Nobody wants to admit anything.
Someone asked me how I set my rates, and the honest answer was the first contract I had said, "What are your rates?" And I plucked a rate out of the air that I thought, well, that seems fine to me, but it's a lot of money. And the client went, "Yeah." And so I tried that with my second client, and he went, "Yeah." And I've tried other rates where I've been like, "No, it's too much. That doesn't add up." But I don't lower them. I just wait for clients that will pay that. It would be wonderful to have an anonymous spreadsheet somewhere where we all kind of put in day rate, half day rate, hourly rate, just so people
we are still being recorded, I think. So please don't.
I don't think we'll do that. There was a survey that was passed around on the Fractional CTO forum that was like, oh, here are the kind of rates for that we found in Europe for people doing fractional work. And I looked at it and was like, wow, those are a lot different than I do. So no, I think being recorded.
Yeah, no, I think the short answer for me though is when I first went out into the market, I had no idea. So effectively, I just divided my current salary, right, and just, even though I'd hired contractors before, I think you naturally have this kind of imposter syndrome, right? That actually, am I actually worth that much? But I think for me, it's anywhere between 850 to 2.5 grand a day, right? Because dependent on the work you do, that's the spread of the people that I've spoken to and actually hired myself in some cases. So, and I think it also depends on the stage of business as well. So if you're working for a seed business versus a Series B business versus an enterprise business, they can afford different levels of spend. And also in some cases, the funds that support them actually will be telling the company that actually that's what you need to spend. So as a result, it's set by other people. But it's definitely broad.
Yeah, and I actually have different rates for early stage startups because I do work with a lot of startups. So my rates for kind of like a post-funding scale-up are different from like a seed stage or pre-funding startup. And usually, and people can ask, like, what's the motivation then to work with kind of the early stage ones? Well, that's more because I have more of a passion for that type of work, right? So it kind of motivates me. Plus, you can always kind of try and negotiate for a bit of equity as well to make up for it.
Does anybody seek out equity? I kind of see it as a gamble, but usually
I haven't yet, but I want to. It's about finding the right one.
I have a controversial opinion. Well, it might not be controversial, but it's a red flag to me. So I've worked in VC for 6-7 years. So either accelerator programs or what have you, where dealt a lot with equity. Like, it's all risk, it's all downside for me, is the equity. Like, I'll come in a day a week and you pay me a day a week. Like, if you're going to give me equity, you're asking me to go on the risk journey with you, but you're getting the value every day. So there's nothing in it for me. Having said that, I do get offered it, and my answer doesn't please a lot of people, which is, if you want to give me equity in addition to keep my interest and keep me around, more than happy to do it. It's a lottery ticket. Everyone knows it's a lottery ticket, but I've turned down equity only stuff. It's just all risk and no upside as far as I.
Yeah, I wouldn't do equity only. Kind of like, my comment was more about equity as a bonus on top of the discounted day rate that I give early stage startups.
The other thing as well, right? The people in the C roles, like CTOs, CIOs, COOs, they drive a lot of value add. So actually, it should be additive. And actually, to be honest, I shy away from equity as well, for all the reasons that Andy kind of gave, because people don't value you the same way unless they're paying you cold hard cash. So yeah, I think it's definitely a red flag for me.
And my only other comment would be to that as well, is I think my experience is it quite often changes the nature of the relationship between yourself and the business itself. There's a notion of, you begin to make more decisions for yourself rather than, some respects, looking at the business. And it's quite a difficult conversation then sometimes. Are you making it because you want this to happen, or are you making it because you want that to happen? And I've found that out quite painfully. And generally, I used to take equity a lot back in the days, which was normally in addition to whatever I was getting paid. And 99% of the time, nothing ever comes of it, other than a whole bunch of grief once some transaction starts to happen. So is my own personal experience anyway. So
I was going to ask, actually, if the issue around equity, would it potentially be seen as a compromise of the dispassionate professional, or maybe some way of maybe even a distraction from other clients? If you have a vested interest in a specific client, is there a risk that you may almost subconsciously neglect the others because you want to make sure that the clients that you have equity in perhaps get a bit more attention?
Well, I think if you're sector specific, your issue does become, you have shares in one, so therefore, what's the kind of help? If you go with a sector specific thing where you're in finance, or you're doing this, or whatever your kind of specialism is, I think there has to be some element of mental side, and quite often you'll be asked that question now anyway. It didn't used to be, but I've noticed ever increasingly when you're kind of talking to companies, they'll go, are you working for anybody else? Have you got shares in those companies? What other shares have you got? They'll do a company's house search to see if you're on there relative to anything else you might own. So it's obviously becoming a concern for some. And like I say, it's down to kind of personal thing, but I'd always tried to, if I took shares and was doing work for one, I'd just ignore the rest of the sector. So I didn't put myself in that kind of a conflict position, which would be difficult and challenging, regardless of what the competition wanted to do, how much money they offered, those kind of things. So.
I'm distinctly aware of the time. In theory, we've got 3 minutes before the end of the published thing, and I checked, it was 1:30, not 1 o'clock. And so I've got a very good question, which I think I will chop off in 3 minutes' time. Does anybody go out of their way to find a substitute? Somebody who could perhaps take over the work if you're ill or whatever else. Does anybody do that?
I mean, the person who would be my go-to substitute is on this call. It's Ricardo, but we haven't had a chance to do that yet.
Yes, is the answer. But I'm asking about potential. As in, yes, I have somebody in mind who's agreed to fill in.
I would say maybe that's one of the reasons why a community like this could be potentially so useful, because certainly, I mean, Khalil flatters me, and he would definitely be my go-to substitute, at a drop of a hat. But the idea that you would need to be able to provide that in the event that someone questions it, or you, God forbid, you fall ill, that's a huge task, because you're effectively trying to pick someone who almost not represents you, but is at least associated with your name and your reputation.
I would have a counter kind of, a counter view, really. When I set out to build my own business, I wanted it to be just that, my own business. And I've had opportunities along the way to basically, to potentially have 4 or 5 sort of CTOs working with me. But I purposely don't do that, because that isn't my business. I kind of want it to be a lifestyle business. I want to work 3 days a week, or some days some weeks I want to work just a day a week. And I don't think you either set out to kind of build a brand or build your own business, or you want it to become much more. So I think it's one or the other. It's not both.
There's agencies like people like Freeman Clark that have like 20 fractional CTOs on their books, and you go, if you want, it's almost like super umbrella for fractionals, that you're part of a structure that will find you work, but you give over some of your day rate, I imagine. And I think if people are taking a first step, you could do that. But I agree with Matt, it's one or the other. If being a fractional is a lifestyle thing, just as much as, and the mental model that it creates within you, just as much as it is my preferred way of interacting with companies.
On the Freeman Clark topic, actually, I think one of the things that turned me off from that model of things as well is that they want to own your entire kind of business development pipeline. And so for me, that's immediately a no-go, because, like Matt said, I want to have control over kind of how I build my image. But I think the substitution thing as well can be just also if, you need to take a holiday, or you have a family emergency, or I'm thinking more along the terms of a very short-term substitution where your client actually needs that supervision.
Folks, we've gone past the hour, so I think if there's any questions that haven't been asked yet, please tell Barry, and we'll schedule another one of these. So thank you very much for attending, and goodbye. And please connect to me on LinkedIn.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you very much.